Welcome, everyone, to our session on managing stress in research courses through intentional course design, which is from the Education Resource Center here at the SCCTSI. It's a NIH-funded hub for clinical and translational research. Many workshops do focus on assisting us with our personal or our societal stress. They discuss techniques such as mindfulness and stress management. However, there are far fewer workshops dedicated to how we can influence the reduction of stress through course design, through how we design and teach our courses. And that is the topic of today's work. It is a working session, so we'll be taking frequent breaks to work with colleagues and make actual plans for implementing changes into our courses. It is requested by colleagues who teach research courses, and we do take requests, so if you are interested in an educational workshop on a topic of interest to your colleagues, please let us know. And with that, we'll begin with our objectives. By the end of our work together today, we will be able to select at least one course design technique from the ones presented, or possibly from the ones you get from colleagues, for managing the stress, not only for our students, but for ourselves as well. So we'll pinpoint both instructor and student stress. And plan. We've got to take action. It's great to hear about it, but what are we going to do about it? So we'll plan the implementation of at least one technique. Hopefully more. It'll be up to you. So what? Why do we really care about this? Why do we even want to change our course design or our teaching? Because stress impacts memory and retention. This is a proven fact. We know that stress makes for shorter recall and shorter long-term retention of information. And that is a majority of what we do when we're teaching. We're hoping that the students have a skill that is retained and that is transferable to their actual working lives, their professional work. We also know that the university and other private support services help us manage personal and societal stress. Particularly now, I don't think I even have to mention the stresses that have come up with the COVID-19 pandemic and with racial battle syndrome, which is when we are faced with systemic racism, particularly prevalent recently. However, course design and teaching, the way we map, the way we plan, and the way we act with our students can reduce one type of stress in particular, which is that academic stress just related to what's happening inside of our courses. And some academic stress is actually good. So if it is related to the skill we teach, for example, if you are teaching skills for an ER doctor, the teaching of those skills are understandably happening under stress because you're training for that type of environment. So I'm not recommending we take away all stress. Some stress is good. It's intentional if it's related to the skill that your students need to learn. Perhaps you have another example of a skill you teach where you actually want a little bit of stress. Feel free to mention it. You can say it out loud or you can put it in the chat. It's possible that you need a little bit of pressure when teaching that skill. Okay. So what does cause academic stress? This is a sharing activity. So for yourself, you can put it in the chat. What is causing you academic stress as a faculty member? For your students, what do you know causes them academic stress? They tell you, you can feel it, you sense it with your experience. That's when you get a flurry of emails, for example. Please feel free to share. You can speak out and share. You can put it in the chat. Let's see what you come up with. What is causing your academic stress in general? Deadlines. Okay. Yep. I'm getting some private chat. Exams, right?
I would say there are
Time.
so many meetings now, one after the other, that has become very stressful. There's kind of no time to think.
Time. Yep. Late notice. About deadlines. Yep. Waiting to time. Okay. Well, when we look at what students and faculty say, when we survey them, when we ask them, when we do focus groups, we find out that for students, the top three, you have hit on most of them. What were they? They were exams, they were deadlines, and they were unclear instruction, causing the most academic type of stress. And we know that these also cause stress for faculty. So when it's causing stress for students, it's also impacting us. For faculty, I don't think you'll be surprised that they said time. Time, time, time. In fact, the other two also relate to time. So grading relates to time, answering student questions relates to time. In fact, many feel that teaching takes time away from other things such as their research. It was all about time. We have to say that most recently as well, we have other types of academic stress that have been of note for students. We have things like stereotype threat coming up in the classroom, where the environment that is created, the academic environment, makes them feel like they are living up to a stereotype about their group, particularly for women in STEM, for example. Discussions that touch upon subjects like race and gender make the students experience more academic stress. And when they feel the instructor has what's called a fixed mindset, when they feel like the instructor doesn't believe that they are able to achieve it, or when the instructor communicates that things are, quote, easy, when in fact they could be quite challenging, but yet we believe the students can achieve them. Okay, now there's something unique though. The reason we're having this session is your colleagues approached me and said, there's something unique, Catherine, about research courses. We have a unique type of stress. So I'm wondering if you would brainstorm what that unique type of stress might be related to research courses. What were the top three there? Safety. Yeah, safety protocols, good one. Yeah, some of the common ones still, time, deadlines, absolutely true. Those are still true. Disinterest in research. Okay, so that would be motivation. Some of that is intrinsic motivation. If you're disinterested in the topic that you've chosen, that may be it. Some of it can be handled extrinsically. Okay. Well, surprise, surprise, what was said was that they seem to agree. Both students and faculty research courses find exams and feedback to be stressful, academically stressful. Both of them found oral presentations to be stressful, awkward, uncomfortable. They found class participation to be a stressful event on both sides. So today we're going to focus on at least one thing we can do to redesign the way we give exams or feedback, what's happening during oral presentations, and how we do class participation, hoping to reduce both our stress and the student stress. We'll get started with that. But since moving online, the number one thing that research students and research faculty state has been the most stressful event, and that we are not covering today because there are many workshops on just this topic. The number one thing, you now cannot conduct your research because you've moved online. It's frustrating and it's extremely stressful. So I encourage you for that topic alone to benefit from the other activities and workshops that are designed just to help you continue to conduct your research online. But it is important to recognize that that was the number one stressor and a sadness. For exams and feedback, we're going to keep two big pictures in mind, if this is all we can remember and all we can do. When we give any kind of question, any kind of exam, any kind of assessment, we just have to match what we're asking to the skill we taught. If we taught it and they practiced it with us, it's a fair question. We call that alignment. When it's misaligned, it causes stress for everyone because we didn't teach it, we didn't practice it, they can't do it, it's stressful. And then when we give feedback, if we can only remember one kind for both, for students giving us feedback and for us to them, it's targeted, meaning that I'm focused on a few things, not everything. It's timely, it's happening as close as to the event as possible, and it's specific. perhaps because you've used a rubric, for example. It's detailed. So our main takeaway here before we get into examples is our learning objectives, the skills that we're teaching, the skills that the students will have by the end of our course, match our assessments, match what we ask them to give us as evidence of that skill. And the rubric, the way we grade them, matches what we asked to see. So there aren't any surprises. It's actually quite boring. It's all aligned. And how do we do this, Catherine? That's great, but what are some examples? How do we do it? Before I can pick one, I need to know what I'm choosing from. Let me give you a menu. When you're doing exams, here are some choices for you. You could try to give more exams, but they're lower stakes. So instead of opting for one final exam or one midterm and one final project, have a few more. Have some that are graded before midterm time, some that are graded after midterm time, lower the percent they're worth so that you can have better recall, retention, and also reduce that stress. We have different types that also reduces stress. Surprise, but an exam is only one type of assessment. It may not be the appropriate type for your learning objective. If you need them to write a research question, you're going to have to collect a research question. That is what you've taught them to do. That's the skill. An exam may not be the appropriate format for that, where you have a multiple choice of identifying a research question. That's a different skill. It doesn't match. Try exams of different types, something where they produce, where they present. Maybe it's a project. Because if we have all one type of exam and it's all at the end, let's say, that's extremely stressful, and particularly for students that may not be good at that type of exam. Remember that if I taught it and I practiced it, it's fair game. If I didn't teach it or practice it, it can't be on the exam. You're going to get a flurry of questions. You're going to get angry students. They're going to be stressed if it's otherwise. Your skill levels match. So you're not doing something harder than what you've taught because why? There's no tricks. The goal of an assessment is not to trick or not to see who can do more than what's taught. The goal of an assessment is to simply see if the student can do alone what you've already been practicing. And finally, it will help everyone if it's not a reading comprehension test. So by accident, we all put in examples that come from cultural references that our students may not know, they may not be familiar with. So whenever possible, it's a test about the content. We have an entire workshop dedicated to just designing test questions. So if you'd like to refer to that workshop, it'll be linked at the end. Yeah, we're pausing for questions now before we get into feedback. Perfect.
Sorry about that.
Cecilia?
Can you give an example of not a reading cultural test?
Absolutely. So when you are setting up your question and it's embedded in a scenario or it's embedded in a case study, you're not referring to things that happened out of the time period that your students might live in, out of the country or culture that your students might live in. You're referring to the history or a cultural reference, something from popular culture, television, that your students, particularly international students, would not be aware of. Because now what you've created is a test about other things that's not fair because you didn't teach those things and students may not have experienced those things in the same way you have. But you've accidentally embedded them in the scenario or the case study of your test.
Thank you.
Yes. For feedback, we said given as close to the event as possible. So you might decide, okay, the one thing I'm going to change today is that I'm going to be better at getting the feedback back to the students faster, if possible, closer to the time they took the test or that they turned in the assignment. I'm going to organize it, perhaps that I'm going to tell the students a schedule. I'm going to have a worksheet or a format that I'm going to use. I'm going to have it justified with a rubric. It's much easier to reduce grade contestation when you can circle on your sheet exactly why the points were awarded that way. You're going to give a chance for students to discuss it with you. You might have a policy if they'd like a regrade. What's the policy they follow in order to ask you for a regrade or to meet with you during an office hour? It's ongoing. You might decide to put a mid-semester evaluation. You don't want to wait too long to get feedback from your students or to give feedback at a midterm conference with your students. That reduces stress because you can make course corrections midterm instead of waiting till the very end. And finally, all feedback leads to change. So whether it's the students providing you with feedback on how the course is going or you to them, the goal of feedback is change. We want to see some improvement. So given those choices, we're going to work now together on taking one of those choices and planning an update to your course. You might redesign your exams, or you might redesign your feedback. So in a moment, I'm going to put you in small conversation groups, and you can decide if you'd like to work on one thing to redesign your assessments, your exams, or one thing to how you might redesign your feedback. I'll send through the chat this file so you can see the prompt and you can see the previous slide with the menu of choices that you might like to use. I'm going to pause now to see if there are questions about what we're about to do in our breakout groups while I'm putting these files in the chats. Sure, I have a private chatted question, which is, if you don't teach a research course, can you still participate? Absolutely. So if you don't teach a research course, you may teach something that is related to a research skill, or you may still give common things that others give, such as I'm sure you give exams or assessments, I'm sure you provide feedback, and things like that. Any other questions before we move into the breakout groups? Okay, I'm going to put your task in the chat. Here it comes. So you have that as you go. Okay, here we go. You have 5 minutes. Okay, so we had a wonderful discussion there where it was decided that there were a couple of areas we could focus on to make change, to make updates. One of those was in requesting more frequent feedback from the students on how the course is going and how we're doing as instructors, which is a terrific idea. It's known as the mid-semester survey or mid-semester evaluation. It doesn't have to be mid-semester, by the way. It could be every 2 weeks. Or we have colleagues that now just keep a running open Google Doc with a feedback form, and students can contribute feedback at any time. I have another colleague that sends a survey or um, a Survey Monkey or a Google survey, any of these tools, a Qualtrics survey every week, right before class. It's optional. You can submit your how you're doing, your check-in, your feedback survey. So that was one change you can make that will definitely help to reduce everyone's stress. When students feel like they have a voice, they have input, but also you listen, it's validated, and then you bring it up. You say, I heard you. This is something I can change, and here is the change that I'm going to make. That is quite successful. Okay, we'll keep
Catherine,
going. Oh yeah,
do you have any rubrics of that sort that you could share with us?
we don't use rubrics for the mid-semester evaluation. A rubric is primarily used to grade or to put a score to determine the student's skill on an assignment. When we're speaking about the feedback surveys, feedback is usually more open, so you're not going to be scoring your professors, but you're going to be asked in the case of the midpoint check-in, you're going to be asked 2 or 3 open questions. And the goal of those questions is, one, if you heard the response from the students, you would be able to change it. You'd be able to make a course correction midpoint. And two, you're willing to make that course correction midpoint if you got the answer to that question. And there are samples that I can attach when you receive the materials from today's workshop.
That would be great.
But if you're not able to change it, for example, it's not effective if the students say, we want less homework. That's not possible because there's a requirement of, for example, how many reading materials must be given for a graduate course, for example. You cannot change some of it. So you have to be able to change it and willing to change it. Okay. Let's move on to another pain point that we heard from your colleagues about research courses, that research often needs to be presented through oral talks, oral presentations. Actually, this is the teaching of others. And the teaching of others is known to be one of the most effective ways for student learning when they can teach others. However, This is a pain point because so often I hear from faculty that they don't actually teach the skills required. So they are requiring speaking skills, public presentation skills, but now don't teach them, meaning it's not part of their learning objective. They don't teach them about the skills needed for that. And the next one is the idea of chunking up the steps. Usually we find that we just assign an oral presentation and we expect it to magically appear. When we chunk up the steps, this has a name in educational talk. It's called cognitive task analysis. It's the expert showing the student the steps the expert would go through in order to prepare something. We think it's hand-holding, it's not. It's actually a great stress reducer and a great teachable moment for you, so the students see how you would do it. So if we can only remember, a couple of takeaways here, what we'd wanna remember here is if you grade it, you have to teach it. So if you're grading their eye contact or their body language, you have to teach that. If you're grading their slide design, you have to teach that. At least put links in the syllabus to where they can get information on how to learn how to make an effective presentation. And our next takeaway for chunking up steps is that that's expertise. So the more smaller parts we can make, the more we are modeling how experts think. How when you first did it as a novice, you're going to have to go through it. The expert is guiding you on how to do that. All of this can be applied to oral presentations. That's great, Catherine, but what do you mean? Where's my menu? I want things I can pick from specifically. What can I actually do? Okay, so you're going to inventory all the skills that you're grading if you're doing public speaking. So are you grading eye contact, body language, slide design, the format, the timing, the audience? Is it the right level for the audience that they're teaching? Do you require them to lead a discussion on it, which is a professional skill? Do you require them to field Q&A? All of those skills need to be taught, meaning you're going to have to model them or give resources on what you're expecting. And my menu for chunking, these are actually steps. So I do all of these. You might pick one. You might say, today I'm going to add one of these things. I do absolutely all of them. So I start with an outline or a template. It's basically a worksheet. This is fill it in. I give samples and I ask for a draft and I say, here are some samples. I know you could improve them. How might you? Let's see how you would. I give practice time. You could do it in small groups. If you don't have time for that during class, they could meet outside of class and make a recording. There's peer feedback. So before I even see it or before they even present it, I reduce stress by having them get feedback from a peer. They could post it on Blackboard and get peer feedback. They could just send it to a peer as a video and get feedback. This is structured, by the way, so I have to tell them what they're looking for in their peers. I also provide self-check. There's a rubric for this assignment, which was mentioned earlier. Assignments are graded with rubrics. So I say, here are my requirements. This is how you earn points. Line up your presentation with a self-check. Check off the things you think you've done before you actually do it for the whole class or before you do it live. Then we finally present. After all of those other steps, finally we present. We can do it live or we can do it recorded if we don't have time to do it live. But the purpose is that the audience, the peers, the classmates are doing something too while the presentation happens. So that's why I run a whole class debrief afterward. And that is often accomplished by a deliverable, meaning the classmates have to give me something or have to give the presenter something, showing them either their feedback, something they learned, something they would improve about the presentation. So it's an entire package of work. So you might decide to add just one of these things that might reduce stress when giving your oral presentations. You'll get better quality. It should be easier for you to grade. It will be a less stressful day on presentation day. I hope so. So let's see, again, discussing with a colleague what you might change about oral presentations. Either you've realized, my goodness, I don't actually teach that skill, yet I'm grading it. Or you've realized, oh, there are steps in between that the students or I might take to reduce stress. By the way, it's okay if you've realized this. You know, Catherine, I don't teach oral presentations and I don't want to. This is just the vehicle by which I receive the students' skill. For example, if you collect a paper, you may not teach them how to write a paper. The paper is just the vehicle for collecting the skill, collecting the content. If that's your case, you're not going to grade their oral speaking skills at all. You're really just going to grade the content of the presentation. So that might be your realization today. Sometimes it's just the vehicle. If you ask the students to make a video, you're not grading or teaching video making skills. You're really just looking at the content. I'll stop sharing and let's take questions before we go into breakout groups again. Questions for what you're about to do by redesigning something about your oral presentations. Here comes the file in the chat. So you see those menu of choices that you might like to work through. All right, I'm going to open the room again. Okay, welcome back. So you had discussed several updates to your oral presentations. I'll mention one fruitful change that came out that I heard is that you've decided that you need to remember to give the rubric for the oral presentation at the same time as you give out the assignment or the first time that you're explaining the assignment so that students get both the page that is the assignment description as well as the rubric showing them the manner in which you determine their skill, the attainment of that skill to the degree to which they've attained that skill. Any other changes you're welcome to mention? Speak them out or put them in the chat. The goal here is we've changed at least one thing. So for one thing, we've reduced stress. It also came up that practice can be optional. If you don't have time to schedule in all of this practice, at least you can provide it as an option. Students can take agency over engaging in their own practice. You've given them a guide or a worksheet on how to do practice. Okay, let's see if we can press for one more change in our time together, which is class participation. There are two main goals here, or two takeaways, that really the idea of participation is quite outdated. So what we use now is referred to as in-class work. The struggle is that most faculty would like to see attendance and participation, but we really don't mean a heartbeat. That's not what we want. We don't want a camera on or a voice on. We want production is really what we're striving for. And so when we do in-class work, that means that we are actually producing. We're getting small pieces of information from the students. We're collecting them. In some cases, we're grading them, very small points, so that we can prove that both they were present, but more importantly, that they were doing something, that they could apply what the lecture was about to something small. We also have alternatives to cold calling. So it's not really our point to scare the students or to catch them off guard, but we really are invested in knowing whether they were prepared. So that's actually the point here. We can reduce stress in the way that we call on them, but still have the benefit of them applying what they've learned and us checking their progress. So what this is all about here is what is known in education speak as formative feedback. That's what we're really hiding when we say we want the students to do the readings or when we say we want the students to participate. We're hiding our true goal, which is formative feedback. That means that the students have produced something, that they are held accountable for that, and that both the students and we can see progress. All we're doing really here is checking progress. Students need to see progress. That is a stress reducer. How am I doing? I'm never sure, right? I need the feedback on how I'm doing. I need to practice these skills. Practice, practice, practice. And faculty. Faculty need to know how the students are doing. It's always a concern. So it's not really a reading check. It's not really attendance. It's a concern about progress. Are they getting it? I'm not sure. So that's why we have what used to be called class participation. And if we know they're getting it and it feels good to get it through practice, doesn't it? All of this reduces stress. Great, Catherine, but I don't get it. Exactly what should I do? Give me a menu to pick from. So many choices for this one to change your participation to what's now called in-class work. It's a simple change in the syllabus. Replace that word participation, call it in-class work. If students need to refer to it as participation, just let them know you've changed it to what's known as in-class work. It's participation through production. You don't have to do it in every class. It can be at random as long as you tell the students. At some points during the semester, I'm going to have you do in-class work. I'm going to collect that in-class work by the end of class, either through email, through Blackboard, posting it, giving a presentation, and it's going to be graded. Remember accountability. It's going to be worth low points. How do I earn participation points? That has to be transparent. It actually has to be recorded because it can be challenged. So how did I earn points for this work? There's no need to grade it with a rubric. There's no need to add to your grading load or stress of grading. You're checking and you're assigning low points, low stakes to the times in which you're going to be collecting evidence of true participation, which is called in-class work. Make everyone's life simple and drop the two lowest scores. Of course, maybe you weren't there, you didn't do the in-class work that day. It's all right. I don't need to know why. We're all adults. I'm going to drop the lowest two. I'm only going to count the in-class work I've collected. All right. Here are some ideas for in-class work. It can be a main takeaway. Tell me the main takeaway of the course today. You can post it to Blackboard, you could email it, whatever you decide. Let's pause for a 1-minute write during class. We're going to write for 1 minute and I'm going to collect that summary. And for today, that's going to be your participation points, meaning that's your in-class work. Instead, you might have them send you a muddy point. You've noticed it's a day where they seem to be challenged by the topic, and you'd like them to send you a question about something that's muddy for them, and they get credit for that. That's in-class work. A partner quiz, give a quiz. And remember, it can be at random. You've warned them. It's in-class work. But partner up. You could take the quiz together. Or even better, have them make a quiz. A terrific skill for where they give you the questions that they would ask if they were the instructor. They could do a mini presentation. By the end of class, I'd like your group to prepare a mini presentation. This will count towards your in-class work grade. All right, all of this can reduce the stress that participation, or what we think it should be, but really isn't, it's not the goal, could be instead. Calling on students. First of all, cold calling isn't bad as long as we structure it into a habit. So what is scary about cold calling, what causes stress for both students and faculty, is that it hasn't become an environmentally supported habit. They're not used to it. It's not comfortable for anyone. It's scary. So there are cultural expectations around participation that you may need to address. Why do we participate? Why do we challenge the professor in US academic culture? Let's do a scale of being able to scale up to feeling comfortable being cold called. How do we do that? Let's start with a written response. In the beginning of the semester, I'm not going to cold call. Nobody's ready. It feels awful for everyone. Let's write our response. Okay, now I'm comfortable writing it first to prepare it and share it. Next, I'm going to pair share. I can be put in a group with 2 or 3. I feel comfortable enough to express. Next, scale up. I'm ready to do this in a smaller group. I can make my group bigger, 5, 6. Finally, I can go to the whole group, but I'm going to stage it. I'm not going to just say, Jeff, Cecilia, Mallory. I'm going to say, first I'm going to hear from Jeff in a moment, then I'll hear from Cecilia, and after that we'll hear from Mallory. I've prepared you, I've gotten you ready. I can private chat you and let you know, here's the order I'll be calling on you. You can have the students call on each other. So I'll toss it to Jeff and I'll say, Jeff, you can select the next person and give them agency to do that. Assign job roles. When you're working on something, give them 3 or 4 jobs. Have them select the job for the group they'd like to do, ensuring that everyone has a job of equal value and of equal voice. Providing multiple channels can help. Utilizing the chat and allowing that as participation. Utilizing voice with or without video, utilizing the ability to post asynchronously on Blackboard as another way of calling on students. And finally, our self-analysis, looking at the recording of your class and thinking about, who did I call on? Who did I not call on? Am I biased towards any group? Is there a student that's dominating? Is there a student that's silent? And what can I do to change that to ensure that there is equity of the voices being called on? So much to choose from here, so much. I'm going to stop sharing before we get to our next example of how you might change participation. So the last one is, what might you do to change participation so it would be less stressful? Hopefully it's not stressful already, but in case it is, what would we do? So let me stop sharing. I'll take questions while we're preparing to go into breakout groups for the last time to work on our participation. It's often a new idea, so it may need to settle in that we're actually not, we don't really want attendance, and we don't really want participation, meaning a heartbeat. We're actually invested in something else entirely, and it can be restructured. Okay, if there are no questions, then we'll go back into breakout groups. Okay, welcome back. We had a robust discussion here, particularly showing concern, being mindful of our international students who may benefit from a cultural discussion about US academic culture regarding participation and discussion, as well as everyone benefiting from writing something down first when being asked so that they have some time to prepare, getting feedback from a peer on what they've prepared, so that it becomes more comfortable over time to relax that, and the environment is set up to be supportive enough that eventually I can speak with less and less preparation. Or to use Blackboard. If you're not going to be online, or even if you are, you can use Blackboard and they can post it. So there's multiple formats. You can post it in writing, you can speak it. And by the way, sometimes we do want cold calling because it's a skill. So at the beginning, I said some stress may be necessary depending on your skill, such as if you're teaching ER doctors under stress, the skill of working under stress is something you're teaching. The same might be true here. If your profession requires spontaneous response or being able to field a question spontaneously, that could be a skill you're teaching. And cold calling is absolutely appropriate because you're preparing them for that skill. So that would be a situation where it's completely okay. Stress is actually purposeful for the skill. Okay. So by the end of our time together today, we selected a course design technique. You've selected several of them, and we planned the implementation of a chosen technique. So this is a sharing moment where I invite you to share through multiple channels, voice, chat, what you've decided to do. Because it's great that we thought of these ideas and we have these menu of choices and options, but if we don't do anything, then we can't reduce any of our stress, ours, our students. So I'll invite you to share now. So I'll mute and you go ahead if you feel comfortable letting us know your plans. What are your plans? Perhaps you've selected one thing, one change that you're going to make to your course in an effort to reduce your stress or student stress, and you'd be willing to share that change. This pause is normal and it's longer online. And so techniques are to restate the question and also to do the staged cold calling. So we can actually practice that now. So first I would like to hear, if you're willing, from Cecilia, and after that we'll hear from Jeff about one thing they might try in order to manage their instructor or student stress, one of these techniques that they'd be willing to share with us that they're going to try. So we'll hear from Cecilia and then Jeff.
I was trying to write it in the chat, but it just didn't come out right. So I think what I'm really going to try to do is come up with several ways to incentivize the students to participate in class. So I'm gonna take some of your recommendations and maybe have them write down first, or I may use Blackboard to be able to get their opinions. So I'm really going to work on that, because for that class, that's one of my main problems, that there's only like 3 or 4 that are always responding or interacting with us.
Yep. So you notice there are some students dominating, and you'd like to be more inclusive of the others in a way that's not stressful for anyone. So multiple channels. You may also require it because it's in class work. So you may collect it and you may give it some points. Okay. Thank you for sharing, Cecilia. And Jeff, if you don't mind sharing, I know you shared so much before, and I mentioned some of those things when we got back together. So thank you for allowing me to mention those things earlier on. Okay. Well, Jeff did ask where I can find these materials. So you wanted to know where you could get everything that we've talked about today. This series, the Education Resource Center series, has 2 other recorded workshops that may be of interest to you that touch on trauma. So these are other course design techniques that you could use when we find that trauma has been influencing our students and our own lives, and then coming into the learning environment. What can we do to help manage that? Also, the one I referenced on writing questions that measure what matters. So when you're redesigning your exam questions, to make sure that they're aligned in efforts to reduce stress. Some of the items that I mentioned here you may find at the Center for Excellence in Teaching. All the citations I've used are linked in their research guide, and you can find how to switch your participation to in-class work. There is also a mid-semester evaluation that I will put in this. I will add this link as well, that teaches you how to ask 2 or 3 questions at midpoint, so that you can get feedback on how the course is going and how you're doing from the students. And finally, we know that there are USC support resources. So I copy and pasted the resources that should appear on all of our syllabi as the last page of our syllabi, just as a reminder that we also support other types of stress, not just academic stress. We support personal and societal stress. These are several of the support services that we should mention, continually bring up during the semester, refer to them, and that are linked on the last page of all course syllabi, just as a reminder. So I just thank you for your time today, your dedication to reducing stress, yours, our students, and I'm so glad that we've made at least one change. We have an intention to move forward by redesigning one thing that could help reduce stress. Thank you for joining us. I'm happy to stay for questions.
Catherine, how do we access all the resources?
Yes, right after this, you'll be getting a link that'll show you the recording of this. It'll show you this PowerPoint with the slides that have all the resources linked within it. This will also be posted to a nationwide clearinghouse, which is called Click, and it is posted on the website for the SCCTSI. So there are multiple ways that you'll be getting it. You will be getting it directly by email.
Thank you so much.
Yep. And then you'll be also getting a survey. We are always interested in other workshops that you might like to attend, and feedback, right? Feedback, practicing what we shared today, in engaging and getting feedback from you. So we appreciate you as well completing that event survey.
What's the web address for the Center for Excellence in Teaching?
It is cet.usc.edu.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.